Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to walk you through the key issues for the upcoming U.S. election. I'll go through some of the key metrics. I'll talk about some key areas of policy and just give you a semblance of where things are heading. Here's a brief bio about myself. I'm a CPA, CGA. I have over 35 years in corporate reporting. I've worked in different roles, driving business process changes to deployment of 300-day and AI solutions. Here's a good look at some key metrics I look at, especially when you look at Class 8 trucks, which is a good indicator of the economy in the U.S. So it's something to bear in mind when you're looking at it. I look at oil rigs too, and I look at different areas of the economy just to get a semblance of it. I'll go more into the inflation, but this gives you a good example of what's changed since for the last 4 years. Housing, housing's a big issue no matter where you are. You're seeing that over the Biden era, housing prices are averaging up 3%. So there's significant challenges with affordability and availability of housing depending on what market you are in the U.S. Cost of living, this gives you a good example. Now, when Biden left office, we were still coming out of the pandemic. So there's a lot of issues around food costs. So it's really taken the U.S. 3.5 years to bring some of the inflation overall down, but prices are still growing. They're just growing at a slower pace. This gives you an example of a trend where you look at when Biden took office, inflation was 1.3%. And when you look at when Trump took office, it's 1.2%. So now we roll forward to August, we're 2.5%. So inflation's still almost double to where it was when Trump left office. One of the big things that Kamala is pushing, she's pushing wage and price controls. They've never worked. Canada tried them in the 70s. They just don't work. There's other ways to go after costs, and that looks at the whole input cost and looking at from the farmers to the food processors to the wholesalers all along the supply chain to look at that and look at taxes, look at the whole process to see what can be done to better support reduction in costs. This gives you some quick ideas around key items, and you can see over the last few years, key areas of diet, bread, um, meat, and eggs have all gone up significantly under the Trump Harris regime. I like to use commodities because they're part of the input cost, so you can kind of look at that, especially when you're looking at lithium. When they took office, they were pushing the green stuff on the EV side, and that's a big issue because the automotive plants are jostling or pivoting around what they do in terms of the EV adoption and their processes in terms of what they're moving forward with. Trade. So when Biden and Harris took office, the biggest trading partner in total trade, combined trade, was China. That's now been replaced with Mexico. Why am I raising Mexico? Because Mexico's seeing some investment, and China's looking at it in terms of BYD and some of their EV cars to bring them into the U.S. via Mexico to see if they can avoid the tariffs and trade. So it'll be interesting to see how Canada and Mexico trade agreement withstands the next government or what changes happen. Employment. Majority of the jobs that have been created in the service sector, which makes sense because they basically were decimated during the COVID era. So it's something to bear in mind when we talk about employment. That's why we're seeing what the wages are down. It's because the job mix has changed significantly since Biden and Harris took office. This gives you an idea, and I want to highlight here. So what I've done in this particular chart is I use the same mix of employment that happened under Trump. So if they were to keep the same ratio, I estimate that under the Biden Harris regime, they've lost 63,000 jobs. The fiscal gap, this gives you an idea. So when they left office, we're still at a 2 point something trillion-dollar deficit. I'll get in more around the issues around taxation later on, but the expending, especially like Medicare and all this, and most of the comments I've seen from the Senate or Congress is about looking at ways to slow the growth in expenses. This gives you an idea of energy. So over the last 4 to 5 years, the U.S. has been moving away from coal to natural gas. That's part of the reason why when you see the next slide, you see the emissions are down. Going forward, the key will be is balancing policy around energy. Uh, Kamala Harris supports the Green New Deal, which is a $90 billion deal of programs to support the green transition. So this gives you an idea of emissions where they are, but on the transportation side, you're seeing that it's up. You're seeing in the electric power, which makes sense as I mentioned earlier, because of the natural gas, and residential because of the wet climate. It's driven by climate, so we're seeing less need for furnace use or air conditioning. Climate change, I won't spend a lot of time because this is a hot potato. All we will say is that I've been consistent with my messaging that climate change policies need to be balanced as part of supporting sustainable economic growth. Competitiveness. When Trump was in office, the U.S. was up in the top four in competitiveness. They have since fell out. They were like number 12th in the latest poll I seen. And it shows you that Biden's policies haven't been effective in terms of making the U.S. more competitive. Border, as you can see, when Trump took office or left office, he had a lot more control over the border. We're seeing a lot of issues in towns like Springfield around illegals and how they're being moved around. This is a hot potato because people are want more security around their open borders and they want to make sure the borders are closed. It's curious when people watch this is they need to listen and see if these people are providing viable options. Real wages, as you can see, this chart have shrank over the last 3.5 years since Biden took office. And a lot of it I still think has to do with the job mix, with more going to the service sector job. We are seeing with policies like the Inflation Reduction Act, where it's encouraging key sectors like electronics to make sure we have control of the chips and other things. But remains to see how the other leaders, both Kamala Harris and Trump, will respond to jobs and what their economic policies are, and how people will ask questions to get more specific details. And I'll get in a little bit more about this in the next few slides. Taxation is a big issue. Is Kamala's policies are to move the federal corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. That's critical because the U.S. is in the competitive marketplace, so that'll just we've seen when we have high corporate taxes, like pharmaceutical industries move to Ireland. So we need to be careful how we manage taxation. There's also the unrealized capital gains. They're targeting 100 million asset value. Now that just once they start setting a threshold, that doesn't mean it won't be pushed down. And people want clarity around the taxation side. Because taxing capital is a big issue for everybody, especially if you're trying to create wealth and create jobs and grow your GDP per capita. This all plays into it. And GDP is critical because it drives your taxation base, which then drives how you fund your Social Security, defense, and other programs. Foreign affairs, the great debate on is like NATO is trying to expand. I've had different discussions around NATO. I believe NATO has a role, but it has to be reformed just like the United Nations. And I think overall, when we see stuff around defense spending, we need to look at how defense has to be. NATO was created as part of when the Warsaw Pact was there. The world's changed. China's become more a superpower, so we need to be cognizant of that. Israel peace is always going to be tricky until we can make sure that it's a two-state solution, and that's the big critical path in a lot of the Middle East is a two-state solution. Russia and Ukraine, this needs to get resolved. It's been ongoing for close to 3 years now. It's basically something that needs to be resolved, and maybe it's going to require somebody like India's Modi or somebody else to get involved. And maybe it's going to require a backpedaling of the NATO, Ukraine coming into NATO. So I think it's going to have to be around policy change. There's going to have to be some give and take to get this resolved. AI, this really comes back to having GDPR stuff and expanding it down to generative AI around privacy, ethical, and security issues related to data. This is a little bit how you can reach out to me. I do these presentations just to bring light to the issues. If I can help your organization with your sales growth or other issues you're struggling with, then feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.